We are currently wrapping up the first week of major tournament results for the new Mythical Island format. And what I thought it'd be fun to do is create a half tier list video, half just showing you guys what the best performing decks are right now. So a bit of a meta update. It's so early on in the meta that I don't feel confident in ranking every single deck, but I think it's going to be a fun thing to look back on and see where we were at the start of the meta compared to where we're gonna be at the very end of it. So let's take a look at these lists, and if you guys are enjoying the content, please be sure to subscribe. I have about 30,000 of you that consistently come back to this channel, but have still yet to hit that subscribe button. So if that sounds like you, consider it. I would really appreciate it. The first new archetype I want to talk about is the Gyarados Greninja. Okay, I was trying so hard to figure out Gyarados. I was trying it with Vaporeon plus Starmie plus Articuno. I can never seem to get the deck to work, and it seems like the best way to play it is with Greninja and Druddigon to act as a wall. Now, this is a deck that only plays water energy. You never want to attack with Druddigon, and I gotta get this out of the way. All right, got a lot of people coming at me. I wrote off Druddigon when I first saw it. To be fair, I did not even consider it as a wall. I only looked at it as an attacker, which, to be fair, as an attacker, it's not a great card. But as a wall, no weakness. It has the rough skin ability. It is simply just the best wall in the game. The rough skin ability that it has does 20 damage if your opponent does damage to it. That is super important. It fixes a lot of numbers for many of these cards that choose to play Druddigon in their list. So from what we've seen, number one, first thing I gotta say is currently in the Ursa Day Pocket Weekly, the biggest tournament that happens every single week, about 40% of top 32 is Gyarados Greninja, and then there's a couple of like Gyarados Starmie. This is currently my favorite way to play it. I think that the Greninja version is the best, but there are some Gyarados Starmie decks running around. To take up 40% of the meta share is ridiculous. That is so unbelievable that this is the first time we've seen a deck that isn't Mewtwo or Pikachu be able to do that. Now, talking about matchups, this deck takes a fantastic Mewtwo matchup. It's good into Celebi, it's good into any Arcanine Charizards you see, good into, what else? Scolipede. It's good into basically every deck in the meta that isn't Pikachu. Every other deck, you're taking somewhere between a 50% matchup all the way up to a 65% matchup. So its matchup spread is very good. You just have those Pikachus to worry about, and that's kind of what kept it down in the Ursa Day tournament. It didn't end up winning. I don't even know if it came in top 4. I don't believe so. The Pikachus just sort of got to run free, run wild with all the Gyaradoses they got paired up against. But this is a fantastic deck. I mean, a stage 1 with 180 HP, it's only getting knocked out by a Charizard. Mew can't even knock it out with its attack because he only does 140 damage, but 140 damage is like a perfect number. You use that Greninja in the Druddigon to bring Mewtwo's in range. You can use that to bring Charizard's in range. Just super fantastic. If you can manage to get that Gyarados up and running, it's going to sweep through your opponent, and there's really not a lot they can do to counter that. So yeah, I absolutely love the deck. Let's get over to ranking it. So maybe a little controversial, maybe a little too early to call, but I do think that Gyarados has the potential to be an S tier deck. It was the 4th most played deck at the Ursa Day, and then it converted into 40% in top 32. That is an absolutely crazy conversion rate. The matchup spread looks like it's great. It does have some consistency issues. You're a stage 1 plus a stage 2 deck. You need 4 energy on that Magikarp or Gyarados in order for it to start attacking. Because it has those weaknesses that are exploitable, it is going to be bottom of S tier, but nevertheless, amazing showcasing this week. I think it will continue to do very well. It will never fall under A tier, I don't think. So yeah, just an incredible deck. Very happy to see Gyarados doing well, because it is just a very fun deck to play. Next deck to talk about is this Scolipede Wheezing deck. Now, when the format first started, Scolipede Wheezing was absolutely everywhere. It was doing very well into the meta. Now that we have Gyarados figured out and some other decks are starting to rise up, I think the deck got worse. So if you take a look at the matchup spread for this deck, and granted, not everything has completely played out as much as we would like. You know, some matchups the deck has only played into like 50 times, which isn't really the best data, but we're going off of the very, very, you know, limited stuff that we have in order to talk about these decks and discuss the meta moving forward. So if you look at that data, right now, it feels a lot like Wheezing Arbok did, where it has a fantastic Mewtwo matchup, about a 70% win rate against Mewtwo. And then you look at the other decks that are big threats in the meta, and that matchup spread gets a lot worse. If you look at Pikachu, it has a bad Pikachu matchup. It has a bad Gyarados matchup. It has a bad Arcanine, Charizard. Its Celebi matchup isn't great. It seems to lose to mostly everything that isn't Mewtwo more often than not. So from here, again, this is starting to feel a lot like Arbok Wheezing did to me. I don't think that the deck is really well positioned. It is always going to get those not free wins, but more often than not free wins against Mewtwo, and Mewtwo is the most played deck still, so it can do very well based off of that. But once you start hitting these other matchups, things get very difficult for you. I don't know where we go from here. Last time we solved Arbok Wheezing by throwing in a 1/1 Wigglytuff. I think that this deck is probably going to need some other attackers in order to boost those bad matchups. It could even just be figure out how we can get a 1/1 Wigglytuff into this list as well and run that and see if our matchup spread improves. That would get a little bit tricky because now instead of being 3 stage 1s, we're doing 2 stage 1s and a stage 2 Pokemon. So curious to see where Scolipede Wheezing goes. But for all those reasons I just outlined, I think Scolipede Wheezing is going to stay a B tier deck. Not quite A tier. It just does not have the matchups. B tier even feels a little bit generous seeing how bad the other matchups are for it. But I mean, it was doing well 2 days ago, and now that we have Gyarados on the rise, and Gyarados is becoming a super popular deck, and Pikachu is seemingly not going anywhere in terms of how much it's played or how well the Pikachus that are being played are doing, it's got to stay B tier. It's getting bullied by all of the other decks above it, so that's where you got to stay, Scolipede. I'm sorry I was excited for you. I thought you were going to do a lot better. Just is not the case. We need to talk about what happened to Celebi this weekend. So prior to this weekend and Gyarados EX entering the format, it was doing very well in the meta. Now that Gyarados is here, it has taken a sharp dive. It didn't even make top 32 at the Ursa Day Pocket Weekly. I am not totally convinced that it is a Celebi problem, to be honest. Right now, the Celebi Gyarados matchup is coming in about 60-40. However, in theory, that matchup plays into Celebi's strength so well. Celebi gets really out of hand and hard to deal with when you give it time. Gyarados decks are going to give the Celebi deck nothing but time. Unless they high roll with a Misty, which is totally possible, it should be a pretty favorable matchup for you. I would think you would ideally want to be setting up a Celebi on the bench while attacking with something else. I think that the problem is that our lists are not totally dealt with to deal with Gyarados. They were more so made for everything else in the meta, not taking Gyarados into account. But now that Gyarados is such a big threat, the lists need to change a little bit. From what we can see, Celebi doesn't have the best Mewtwo matchup either. It's about 60-40 as well. That one I'm not really too sure how we go about improving. I'm still a Celebi believer. I still think that this deck is very good. I just don't think that it's being done justice with either the list or how people are playing into these matchups. I think there are some mistakes being made here because I just don't see how it's losing to Gyarados 60% of the time if you are playing correctly. A lot of the time I see Celebi players just going all in on Celebi, you know, put that Celebi in the active spot, attach an energy to it every single turn, get it just completely built up, and then once a big threat comes in and knocks that Celebi out, you're left with nothing. You need to be putting your energy down correctly. You need to be building up 2 different Celebi at the same time, so when that Celebi inevitably faints, you have the other one in the back to go clean the game up for you. So yeah, Celebi has taken a massive drop off in the meta. I'm still a believer. I wasn't ever quite sold that it's an S tier deck, but I don't think it's like gonna completely fall out of the meta either. I think that there's some work to be done on Celebi to get it back up to the heights it was reaching at the very beginning of the meta. Very beginning 2 days ago, but I do think the route is there. So if I had to rank Celebi right now, I would still say it's an A tier deck. Honestly, I just, the deck is too strong. It has too many fundamental strengths to it. It is being hurt by fighter decks still doing well in the format. That is true. But against some of these S tier decks, I think that it can still do fine if we work on the list. I think we can get the Gyarados matchup in a place that is better, and the other big decks that we're going to talk about, like Pikachu or whatever else, I still think Celebi does fine into. So I don't think it's a B tier deck. It's not like it takes a bad matchup to everything, and the list still has some room to go. So I'm going to leave it A tier. I'm not losing hope on Celebi. I think it just had one bad weekend. We will just quickly go over Aerodactyl, because I think that Aerodactyl is sort of greatly underperformed in this meta. You can play it with Primeape, you can play it with Marowak. The best placing list was with a Primeape build. I just don't think that Aerodactyl is totally that great. Its ability really barely helps you. The ways that its ability comes into play the most is when your opponent just kind of forgets it's there and promotes their Pokemon that needs to evolve without really thinking about it, and then they realize, oh, Primeval Law is online, I can't do that. So its ability doesn't really stop much. Most Pokemon want to evolve on the bench or have the opportunity to evolve on the bench before they start swinging. So, and its attack is also not that great in practice. 80 damage for 2 energy is tough, especially when a lot of decks in this meta can just one-shot Aerodactyl right back. It's just not a high-value card. So yeah, I just wanted to briefly talk about it. Its matchup spread is not fantastic. Playing it with the Primeape, it has its own problems of, if you go first with Primeape, it becomes infinitely worse because you can't safely get that Reckless Charge off without just getting knocked out by like a Mewtwo attack or a Pikachu attack or whatever might be attacking on their second turn with only 2 energy attachments. So yeah, I still have my problems with Primeape. I don't think that Aerodactyl is really that strong. So for that, I'm going to put just any Aerodactyl variant into B tier. I think we have much better fighting decks that we're going to talk about moving forward. But yeah, Marowak, Aerodactyl, or just Aerodactyl as is, not really a great card. Would have loved to see it do better, but unfortunately, I don't really think that it's all that it should be. Another deck we'll sort of go over kind of quickly is just Pidgeot EX in general. I think people are still trying to figure out the best way to play Pidgeot, and having played a lot of Pidgeot myself, I can tell you it is very susceptible to losing to good players. Good players know how to manage their bench, and when you know how to manage your bench against a Pidgeot EX, it becomes very difficult for you. You can't use that Pokemon Flute unless you've knocked out something, and you're often going to be knocking out something only with the Pidgeot EX. Most builds are just using the Pidgeot EX as the only attacker. It just becomes very difficult for really any matchup. I mean, if you're playing against a Mewtwo, I played against Mewtwo's, and all they do is they leave Mewtwo active, build that up while you're building your Pidgeot up, and maybe work on either a second Mewtwo in the back or just a lone Gardevoir line. And that's really all they need. You're not putting on early pressure with Pidgeot EX. They can get up and going faster than you can. So often there's not even enough time to build up a secondary attacker in Pidgeot EX. Just hasn't felt the best. Every single game has felt very difficult for it. I don't think its matchup spread is really there either. It's going to lose to Pikachu because it's just faster. Unless you can get a quick Pidgeot EX out, but that often doesn't happen. And then it still has the chance to lose to just getting high rolled on the Zapdos EX coin flips if they just built that up. That's another big problem for Pidgeot, is sometimes the Pikachu decks don't even bench a whole lot. They can just go lone Zapdos or Zapdos plus one other Pokemon, build that up, and by the time you get ready to attack with the Pidgeot, you just can't get through that Zapdos. So yeah, the deck hasn't felt fantastic to me. Druddigon might just be the best partner for it. I'm not sure. There might be some more work to do on the Pidgeot decks, but for now, we're going to go over and rank it. And I think Pidgeot, sadly, is another B tier deck. The deck has just felt a little bit underwhelming. It's done fine on ladder, but I feel like if I played this in tournament, I would just get counterplayed perfectly. Again, bench management is something that is a bit of a skill to acquire. And if you're playing in an open deck list tournament and they know you're playing Pidgeot, they are going to limit that bench. They're not going to completely loaded up and just let you go in like you might find on the ladder. So for tournament play, yeah, Pidgeot is just B tier. You can play around its attack, and there's really nothing you can do about it. Maybe if we had a trainer card that would pull Pokemon from their hand and put them on the bench, it would be better, but we don't have that. So yeah, Pidgeot, B tier. Another new deck to come out of the Mythical Island set is Greninja Tauros Druddigon. I am always very, very wary of Pokemon that need 3 energy attachments and have no sort of energy acceleration in them. So you have to get 3 energy onto a Tauros or 3 energy on a Druddigon before it can start attacking. That is quite difficult to do, and oftentimes you're going to be met with it only attacking once and then getting knocked out. So the deck has done okay, not really the greatest. This is also a deck that you play both water and fire energy because you actually want to attack with that Druddigon sometimes. You know, you don't have a lot of attackers, so having that Druddigon there is a bit of a bonus. Druddigon can wall in the early game while you're building up your Tauros or Greninja, whatever you want to attack with. But against some of these faster decks, it's just not going to buy you enough time, right? Ideally, like let's say you're playing against Pikachu, Druddigon can buy you 1 turn, maybe 2, depending if they, or sorry, 2 turns, but maybe even 1 if the Pikachu has that early Giovanni play. And by then you might have what, like a Greninja built up, and the Greninja isn't going to be one-shotting that Pikachu in return. You're probably not going to have that Tauros set up because you need 3 energy on it. And if you do have that 3 energy set up on the Tauros, it could just get knocked out by something else that your opponent might have. Again, either a Giovanni play with Pikachu or maybe just a Zapdos attack. And that's just one of the matchups. So I really don't love these high energy cost decks that don't have any sort of energy acceleration. It hasn't been doing that fantastic outside of some of these smaller tournaments. Just kind of flopped a little bit in these larger tournaments. So for that, I think we have just yet another B tier deck. I'll put it over Pidgeot because I think it has more merit than Pidgeot. A fast Greninja can win you some games. There's no denying that. Just if your opponent has a bit of a slow start, you're going to be able to capitalize on that quite well. But there's just not a lot of one-shot potential with this deck. You are relying on getting that Greninja up to fix the math on your Tauros damage or your Druddigon damage. So yeah, I just think it's a B tier deck right now. It's very, very fun to play. I love playing these one prize decks. But the energy cost is just a little bit too much for me to really feel like it's that amazing. So yeah, we're gonna leave it in B tier. This is the last new Mythical Island, or completely new Mythical Island deck I want to talk about, and that is this Golem Dragon list. So when I first saw this Golem, I thought he was very, very strong. I mean, 120 damage and then minus 30 from attacks. This thing never gets knocked out, right? The only thing that's gonna knock it out is a Charizard EX. But into a lot of these other decks, oh my gosh, when you have that Golem set up, you're just going to be getting 2 prizes off of it, almost guaranteed. It is so absurd. Minus 30 damage reduction in this game is crazy. Like, if a Pikachu is attacking into you and you get a guard press off, their attack's only going to do 60 damage max. Against a Gyarados, it's going to do 110. Not totally relevant, but it's not going to knock you out. Mewtwo's not going to be knocking you out even with a Giovanni. This guard press attack is just so fantastic. I think that this Golem is so much better than the Golem we had in the last set. And I think Druddigon has been a fantastic partner for it. I was first trying the deck with Onyx, just trying to stick to the Golem, Onyx, Brock roots, but it's too much. It's too much, which was always my problem with Golem Onyx, was that all of that energy attachment going around is, again, just too much. You really cannot expect to get an Onyx setup while also having a Golem setup and winning the game like that. So Druddigon is a fantastic beginning wall. The Hitmonlee in this deck is so broken. If you're playing against Gyarados and you can get that Hitmonlee out early, you're leaving your opponent with the the tough decision of, okay, do I move this 30 HP Magikarp out of the active spot, or do I put it on the bench where it might just get knocked out by a Hitmonlee? It is super, super difficult for them to play around that. You could even Geodude plus Giovanni to knock out that Magikarp. The Hitmonlee has just felt so great. Hitmonlee can also knock out any Ralts on the bench if they're not evolving them, any Charmanders. It can soften up those Charmanders or Mewtwo's or whatever to put that Golem into one-shot range. The 120 damage is just so good because Giovanni is going to let you knock out a Celebi with that. It's going to let you knock out a Zapdos with that. A ton of these 130 HP Pokemon that might just be out of range by guard press. You fix that math up with Giovanni. Also makes it so you can knock out a Mewtwo. Mewtwo will take 20 damage from the Druddigon. You go in with the Golem, hit him with a Giovanni. There you go. There's the knockout. This deck, from what I've been playing, has felt so good. It is currently right now in the finals of the Ursaday Pocket Weekly. I think it's going against an Arcanine Moltres deck, which might not be as good of a matchup. Depends on how fast they can get that Golem set up versus the Arcanine, but it has a chance of winning the first 1,500 person tournament in this format. So I think that this deck is incredibly strong. All of the numbers are there that let it be a super viable threat. Really, just the hardest part is getting that stage 2 set up, but hey, I mean, Mewtwo does it all the time. Celebi does it. All these other decks can do it, so why can't we? You have the best wall in the game with Druddigon. You have Brock to build up your Golem. You can leave a Graveler with 2 energy and then start building up your Marshadow, which is just a fantastic counterattacker in this deck as well. If Golem doesn't quite get the if Golem doesn't quite get the opportunity to 2-shot something, you can go in with that Marshadow to clean up or just finish the game for you, because 120 damage after one of your Pokemon has been knocked out is insanely strong. The deck just flows so well. I really hope that you guys go out and try this. I'm going to be putting a video up on it very soon because I love this deck. It is quickly becoming one of my favorites. Golem has like never been good in the Pokemon trading card game ever. So to see him be fantastic and be one of my favorite strategies, which is walling, I love it. I love this deck. So although we've barely seen any real results for it besides this one showcasing, from what I've played and just thinking about its matchups, I do think that this is an A-tier deck. Everything is there for it to be good. All of the matchups in theory are fantastic for it. It takes great matchups against the top decks in the game right now. I see no reason why this deck shouldn't be anything but A tier. I love it. It's a great time. Again, go out and try it because it is really that good. Now we're going to move on to the top decks of last format that either got better or are just still relevant in the meta. And the first one we're going to talk about is that Mewtwo. Mewtwo gained the tools of both Mew-EX and Mythical Slab. Mythical Slab is a psychic, basically just a psychic dependent item card. Really only improves psychic types because of its effect. It just lets Mewtwo churn through their deck just a little bit quicker, lets you get into that Gardevoir even more consistently. It is just a fantastic card. And then the Mew-EX is so powerful. It now gives Mewtwo a good option against Charizards. Mew-EX can also be relevant in the Celebi matchup. You can build up that Mew and let it take down a Celebi if you don't have that second Mewtwo. So the deck is performing just as well as it always has. I don't think Mewtwo is going anywhere. I thought maybe Mewtwo would get worse, but as soon as I saw Mythical Slab, I knew that the deck actually wasn't gonna go down a tier or be played any less than it was in Genetic Apex. So just a fantastic deck all around. We know how well Mewtwo has been performing. It's really the biggest nerf to it has been, besides the Mew-EX being in a lot of decks now, has been the Gyarados matchup. The Gyarados matchup is super hard for Mewtwo. Gyarados has such an easy time getting through two big EXs that they have. The Greninja fixes the math, the Druddigon fixes the math. Just a very tough matchup. So that's probably the biggest detriment to Mewtwo as of now, but I still don't think it matters. I still think Mewtwo EX is just that typical S tier threat. It's very good. It's still doing well in tournaments. Yes, it's getting bullied by the Gyarados, but I think that things are going to balance out next weekend when we start to see some other decks rise in meta share. It's not always going to be Gyarados at 40% in the meta, and once that happens, Mewtwo will sort of perform just as well as it always has been. Here we have Arcanine, and Arcanine might actually be the deck that benefited the most from MEWEX. Arcanine was always a super strong deck that really only took a bad matchup to Mewtwo. It took a bad matchup to the water stuff as well, but its biggest concern was Mewtwo. Now we just have the MEWEX to solve that problem. MEWEX is something you can attach to on the bench while you're using Moltres to power up the Arcanine in that matchup. And then besides that, Arcanine is hitting the perfect number on Celebi EX. It's still hitting the perfect number on Pikachu EX. Arcanine has always had a fantastic Pikachu matchup. Really the biggest problem for it now is still that Gyarados. Gyarados is very tough for Arcanine. Arcanine's real only way to steal a game is by just being very aggressive on the Gyarados. If they get off to a slow start, then Arcanine can come in and take enough prizes to wrap up the game before it even really started. But it's felt amazing. It is doing super well in tournaments. Again, it's in the finals right now of that Ursaday Pocket Weekly. It has won a bunch of tournaments. So even though Arcanine is sort of running away with these big tournaments and doing very well, usually my criteria for putting it in S tier is, does the deck have a favorable matchup to some of the other S tier decks? And I just don't think it does. It has an abysmal Gyarados matchup. Even though it has the MEWEX to make the Mewtwo more favorable, it still isn't quite getting there. It's not 50-50 like you would like it to be. It's more like 40-60 matchup, maybe a little bit better than that in Arcanine's favor by a couple percentage points, like 43% at max. But it's just not quite dealing with the S tier threats like we would want it to. That one Mew as the answer can be a little bit tricky. You have to find the Mew. If the Mewtwo is playing blue, then that puts you on finding Giovanni in order to fix that math yourself. Just a lot that can go a little bit wrong for that matchup. So I think that Arcanine is the very top of A tier, still not quite an S tier deck, but you absolutely cannot deny its tournament results. As long as it hits the right matchups, Arcanine can absolutely run away with it. Seeing the decrease in Celebi and the increase in Gyarados makes me just want to put it top of A tier, because like I said, the Gyarados matchup is like a 15%, and a lot of people are on Gyarados right now. We'll talk about Charizard EX very briefly. Charizard Arcanine still does the same things that it did last format. The only problem is that now MEWEX makes it a little bit worse. You now have that counterplay to the Charizard EX. So while I thought it was S tier last format, it also does have some issues with Gyarados. Not the worst, but if the Gyarados gets a Gyarados plus a Greninja up and they time their attack correctly, and you don't time your Charizard attack correctly, they can knock out that Charizard hitting for weakness plus a Greninja ping. So it does get a little bit tricky. Its matchup spread is just that bit worse with the MEWEX now being around. Mewtwo is no longer as favorable as it once was. I'm still gonna put Charizard into the A tier, just at the bottom. If you look at the stats, the Gyarados matchup is not great. The Mewtwo matchup has gotten worse because of that MEWEX. Pikachu is still not fantastic. It does always have that pop-off potential if you get the Charizard set up faster than anything can really deal with, either getting that MEWEX set up or getting a Gyarados set up or whatever. Charizard can run away with it. It has that high roll potential. I don't think it's quite B tier, but I think it's at the very bottom of A tier. All right, you know him, you love him, we got to talk about him. Pikachu EX, still just as strong as ever. Pikachu's fundamentals have not really been hurt too bad by this set. It is still just that setup faster than any other deck in the format and wipe them off the board before they can even do anything. It gained some new tools, being that new Pikachu, the new Electabuzz, and the new Dedenne, all giving it just a little bit more variety in how it's played. It's really a true lightning type box with Pikachu as that main attacker. You just have so many options. There are so many ways to play Pikachu. And again, that fundamental strength of Pikachu just being faster than anything else in the format, allowing it to steal wins that way, it's always going to be there. It has a great Gyarados matchup because it's so quick. It has a decent Mewtwo matchup. Now that Mewtwo is not really playing the baby Mewtwo, that also helps it. The baby Mewtwo was a good wall for it. Now if your opponent either leaves Mew in the active spot and doesn't have the pivot or the budding Expeditioner to pick up that Mew, you now are going to be able to take 2 prizes instead of 1 for getting through their wall. Yeah, just the Pikachu's been doing good. It's still going to do good. Not really going anywhere. And it wasn't hurt really much by anything new that came out. So yeah, Pikachu still on top. And seeing as it's still on top, I think it is our 3rd S tier deck here. Yeah, Pikachu's play has gone down. I think that might just be because of all the shiny new cards that came out. Pikachu kind of gained the least out of everything, so maybe people aren't playing it as much, but I still think it's just as strong fundamentally. You are just going to win games by being more consistent than anything else in the format. So yeah, I feel confident putting it in S tier. I think it's still just that deck, not the strongest deck in the game. I don't think it really ever will be because it doesn't have that high roll potential. All of these other decks can kind of high roll Pikachu off the board. Pikachu just relies on your opponent not high rolling in order to win. So yeah, S tier gonna stay there. It's just the most consistent deck we have. Okay, the last well-performing deck I want to talk about is the Ninetales Rapidash. I've been very underwhelmed by it, and by looking at its matchup spread, I think that is justified. It does not do well against Gyarados. It still doesn't do very well against Mewtwo. It does take a good Pikachu matchup, but that is about it. A lot of these other matchups for this deck have not been going fantastic. It has still had its time. It's had its times in these bigger tournaments or these smaller tournaments more so. It's done okay in the big tournaments. It has some placements, but I don't think that it's quite the threat people might have thought it would be with these new improvements we've gotten, mainly that Ponyta and the new Rapidash. Yeah, I think it's just as okay as it was in the last format. Last format, I put it like bottom of A tier because it could farm those Pikachus, and the Pikachus were everywhere. But now that we've seen Gyarados be more on the rise and Pikachu play sort of go down, I don't think it's going to be that anymore. I'm going to put it in B tier. It does take a good Celebi matchup, but it seems like Celebi's on the decline. Gyarados is on the rise, and that really, really hurts Ninetales. It's not doing well against Mewtwo. It's doing well against Pikachu, so it's got one of the S tiers. But if you look here, like Arcanine can do well against it. Golem will demolish this deck. Charizard can do well against it too, if they get off to any sort of a decent start. So yeah, overall, I think Ninetales is just that B tier deck. Just not overly powerful. It has a very strong early game, but its late game is very lackluster. When you're attacking with the Ninetales, if you attack twice with the Ninetales discards from itself, so that's energy that's not going onto your bench Pokemon and powering up a second big attacker. The best you'll be able to do is like a 40 poke from a Rapidash, maybe 70 if you have a Blains, unless you can run your opponent off the board very, very quickly, which also is difficult because you need to evolve the correct Pokemon. You need to get the Vulpix and then the Ninetales in order to do so in a fast fashion. Yeah, just Ninetales has felt like B tier to me. I wish it was stronger, but with the rise of Gyarados and some of these other decks, it takes a pretty bad matchup spread to the decks that are actually doing the best. That's going to be it. That is really all of the decks I wanted to talk about for this. Like I said, it's not a true ranking of everything in the meta, but there are a lot of decks here that I don't have any opinions, solidified on yet. These are just the ones we have the results on. I've played with. I can tell you how I've been feeling about them. So let me know what you guys think. I'm really curious to see what you guys think about Celebi's placement more so. I know it just did bad this weekend, but again, I think it just had one bad weekend. So that's going to be it. Hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good one.